She's been part of this family longer than you have. My son deserves to have both his mom and dad at Thanksgiving. My husband said those words without hesitation before inviting his ex-wife to our Thanksgiving dinner. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, I just stayed silent, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the house. Exactly 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. The moment the door opened, his face turned completely pale. I still remember the way the cranberry sauce slowly slid across the porcelain dish, glossy and silent, as if it somehow knew everything was about to fall apart. The kind of small, meaningless detail your mind clings to when something much bigger is breaking just beneath the surface. It was late November in Northern Virginia, the kind of cold that settles into the bones. And the house, his parents' house, smelled like roasted turkey sage and something else I couldn't quite name anymore. Maybe it was distance. Maybe it was the quiet realization that I had already lost a place I thought I belonged. We had been married for 3 years, Daniel and I. And for most of that time, we had lived with his parents under what everyone liked to call a temporary arrangement. Though temporary has a way of stretching when it suits the people who benefit from it. After Daniel's business had stalled and the rent in Arlington kept rising, his mother had offered us the basement suite, 2 rooms, a small bathroom, a kitchenette that hummed louder than it worked. And I had said yes because that's what you do when you're trying to build something with someone. You compromise, you bend, you believe it will lead somewhere better. I paid more than half of our expenses quietly without making a performance of it because I had a stable job with a regional insurance firm. And Daniel, well, Daniel had ideas. He always had ideas. A new app, a consulting venture, a friend who just needed a little backing. And I had supported him each time, not blindly, but with the cautious optimism of someone who believes effort should be met with patience. His parents saw it differently. To them, I was practical, yes, but also temporary. Useful perhaps, but not essential. His ex-wife, Megan, on the other hand, was history shared. History, the kind that grows roots and refuses to be pulled out. She and Daniel had divorced 5 years before I met him, and they shared a son, Ethan, who was now 9. A quiet boy with observant eyes, the kind that seemed to understand more than anyone gave him credit for. Megan lived across town in Alexandria, and by all accounts she was decent. We were not enemies, not exactly. We were 2 women orbiting the same gravity, careful not to collide but never entirely comfortable in the same space. Until that night, Daniel, his mother, said, setting down a dish with a little too much force, "Did you tell her?" I remember looking up, fork halfway to my mouth, catching the glance. They shared brief practice and already finished before I could fully read it. Daniel cleared his throat the way he always did when he was about to soften something sharp. "I invited Megan to join us for Thanksgiving," he said too casually, as if he were mentioning the weather or a football game. "For Ethan, it just makes sense." The room shifted, not physically, but in that subtle way a space changes when the air becomes heavier. I felt it press against my chest, slow and deliberate. I waited 1 second, 2, maybe 3, for the follow-up, the explanation that would include me in the decision that would acknowledge this was my home, too, even if it was technically his parents'. It didn't come. His mother smiled, a small, satisfied curve of her lips. "It's the right thing to do," she added. "Ethan shouldn't have to choose between his parents on a holiday." I set my fork down, carefully aligning it with the edge of the plate because control, however small, felt necessary in that moment. "You could have told me," I said, my voice even almost detached, which surprised me. Daniel shrugged, not dismissively but not apologetically either. "We're telling you now," he replied. "It's not a big deal, not a big deal." I glanced at the table, his father quiet as always, focused on his food, his mother composed and certain. Daniel relaxed already, moving past the moment as if it had resolved itself. And then there was me, suddenly aware that I was the only one who hadn't agreed to something that had already been decided. "She's been family to us longer than you have," his mother said, then her tone not cruel, not overtly, just factual, as if she were stating a simple truth about the weather or the time. "My son deserves to have both a father and a mother in the same room for one day." Daniel nodded almost reflexively. "It's just Thanksgiving," he added. "Don't make it into something it's not." But it was already something. I looked at him, really looked this time, and tried to find the man I had married in the easy confidence of his expression. The one who used to ask my opinion before making decisions that affected both of us. He was there technically, but layered beneath something else. A quiet alignment with the people who had known him longer, who defined family in a way that did not fully include me. I'm not making it into anything, I said, and I realized as the words left my mouth that they were true. I wasn't raising my voice, wasn't arguing, wasn't demanding a different outcome. I was simply noticing. Megan arrived an hour later, right on time, dressed in a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that made her look younger than I remembered. Ethan ran to the door before anyone else could reach it, his excitement genuine, uncomplicated. He hugged his mother, then his father, snorts, then looked around as if making sure everyone was where they were supposed to be. "Hi," Megan said to me, polite, careful. Happy Thanksgiving, I replied, matching her tone. We moved through the motion, serving dishes, passing plates, making small talk about work, school, the traffic on I-395. Everything snorts outwardly normal, everything just slightly misaligned beneath the surface. Megan and Daniel spoke easily, not flirtatiously, but with a familiarity that didn't need to be rebuilt. They laughed at small things, shared glances over Ethan's stories, and each time I felt something inside me shift. Not dramatically, but steadily, like a foundation settling in ways it shouldn't. His mother watched them with a quiet satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. At one point, as I stood at the counter refilling glasses, I caught my reflection in the darkened window, my face composed, eyes clear, posture straight. And I wondered not for the first time how someone could be so present in a room and still feel entirely unnecessary. "You're quiet tonight," Daniel said later, leaning against the doorway with a glass of wine in his hand. "I'm listening," I replied. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small shrug, that familiar gesture that always seemed to end a conversation before it could truly begin. "Don't overthink this," he said. "It's just for Ethan, just for Ethan." I nodded because there was no point arguing with a story everyone had already decided was true. Instead, I finished what I was doing, wiped my hands on a towel, and placed it neatly on the counter. "I'm going to step out for a little while," I said. Daniel frowned. "Now?" "We're about to have dessert. I won't be long." No one stopped me as I picked up my coat. No one asked where I was going. Megan was helping Ethan at the table. His mother was arranging dessert plates. His father was pouring coffee, and Daniel had already turned back toward the room, as if my absence was temporary, insignificant, something that would barely be noticed. The cold air hit me the moment I stepped outside, crisp and refreshing. I took a slow breath, letting the silence clear my mind. The quiet street, the distant traffic, the soft glow of porch lights, it all felt more honest than the carefully maintained atmosphere inside that house. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel. I wasn't acting on impulse. This wasn't an emotional decision. It had been building for months, small dismissals, quiet exclusions, decisions made without me. One by one, they had formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I started the engine. 30 minutes later, while laughter and the clatter of dishes still filled the house, the doorbell rang. When Daniel opened the door, expecting a neighbor or perhaps a late delivery, he found something he never saw coming. He would later admit that the first thing he noticed wasn't the man's face, it was the thick folder in his hand, neatly organized, tabbed, and unmistakably official. The kind of folder that spoke of preparation, finality, and decisions that had already been made. "Daniel Harper," the man asked in a calm, professional voice. Daniel nodded cautiously. "Yeah." "Can I help you?" The man glanced at his clipboard before looking back up. "You've been served." He extended the folder. Behind Daniel, Thanksgiving carried on as though nothing had happened. Silverware clinked, someone laughed, probably his mother. Ethan's voice drifted faintly from the dining room. For a second, Daniel didn't move, as though the words needed time to make sense. "Served," he repeated. "Divorce papers," the man replied evenly. "You'll find all the details inside. You have 30 days to respond." Daniel accepted the folder almost automatically, his grip tightening as the weight of it settled into his hands. "Wait," he said, taking a small step forward. "There has to be some mistake." "There isn't," the man answered politely but without emotion. "Have a good evening." The door closed with a soft but final click. Daniel stood there, staring at the folder, almost expecting it to disappear if he waited long enough. Then he turned back toward the dining room. The warmth of the house suddenly felt overwhelming, too bright, too normal for what had just happened. "Who was that?" his mother called. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He walked back in, the unopened folder still in his hands. Megan noticed first. She had always been the most observant. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Daniel placed the folder on the table. The sound echoed louder than it should have. It's from her, he said, not needing to mention my name. His mother frowned. From who? My wife, the words caught in his throat. Silence settled over the room. Even Ethan paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, sensing that something had changed. Daniel opened the folder and began turning the pages. The legal language was precise, organized, and unmistakably deliberate. Dissolution of marriage, division of assets, financial disclosures. Everything had already been prepared, leaving almost no room for negotiation. What is this? His mother demanded, pushing back her chair. What is she trying to do? Daniel kept reading. Really reading, and with every page his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a quiet realization he wasn't prepared for. She filed last week, he said slowly. Everything's already in motion. Last week, his mother repeated, her voice rising. And you're only finding out now? I didn't know, Daniel snapped more sharply than he intended. Megan leaned forward. What else does it say? Daniel took a slow breath and turned another page. She's requesting a full financial disclosure, he said. Accounts, investments, debts. Everything, that's standard, Megan replied softly, though she continued watching his face. Daniel nodded. Yeah. But she's listed assets I didn't even know she had. His mother's expression hardened. What assets? You two barely have anything. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he turned another page, scanning quickly, his jaw tightening. She's moved her accounts, he said. Closed the joint checking, transferred her savings. There's a note here about independent holdings. Independent, his mother repeated, incredulous. Since when does she have independent anything? You're married. Daniel looked up at her then, and for the first time that night there was something like uncertainty in his eyes, not just about the situation, but about the assumptions he had been operating under. She's always handled the bills, he said slowly. Rent, utilities, insurance, I trusted her to manage it. Megan sat back slightly, her expression shifting into something more measured, more cautious. That means she knows exactly where everything is, she said, and now she's organized it before filing. The implication settled heavily in the room. She planned this, Daniel said, the realization landing fully now. His mother shook her head, dismissive, almost offended. Planned what? Leaving over. What a holiday dinner, don't be ridiculous. She's overreacting, that's all. Daniel didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He was still flipping through the documents, slower now, more deliberate, as if each page might reveal something he had missed. She's not asking for the house, he said after a moment. His mother straightened slightly as if bracing. Of course she isn't, it's not hers to ask for. She's not asking for anything from you, Daniel clarified. This is just between us. Good, his mother said quickly. Then it's simple, you'll talk to her, explain that this is all a misunderstanding and she'll withdraw it. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the final page where my signature sat clear, steady, unmistakable. Snorts beneath it, the date last week. While he had been working on his latest idea, while we had been sharing meals, conversations, routines that now felt strangely rehearsed, I had already taken the first legal step toward leaving. She didn't even tell me, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Megan watched him for a moment, then spoke carefully. Maybe she felt like she couldn't, she said. His mother scoffed again. Oh, please, she's being dramatic. You invite your ex-wife over for the sake of your child and suddenly she's filing for divorce. That's not reasonable. Daniel closed the folder, the sound final controlled. It's not just tonight, he said, his voice lower now. It's everything that earned him a sharp look from his mother. Everything, she repeated. What exactly has she been lacking? Daniel, a roof over her head, a family that welcomes her. What more does she expect? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again because the answer now that he was forced to consider, it wasn't as simple as his mother wanted it to be. Megan stood, then moving toward the sink with quiet efficiency, giving the moment space without leaving it entirely. Ethan had gone back to his plate, though his movements were slower, more cautious now. Are you going to call her? Megan asked over her shoulder. Daniel looked down at his phone, still resting on the table, untouched since he'd come back inside. He picked it up. The screen lit up immediately. No missed calls, no messages, nothing that suggested urgency from my side. That more than anything unsettled him. He dialed anyway. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, no answer. He tried again, straight to voicemail. Daniel lowered the phone slowly, the silence on the other end louder than any argument we had ever had. She's not picking up, he said. His mother waved a dismissive hand. Let her cool off, she said. She'll come back once she realizes she's made a mistake, but Daniel wasn't so sure anymore. Because for the first time since the door had opened, since the folder had been placed in his hands, he was beginning to understand something he had overlooked for far too long. I hadn't reacted. I hadn't argued, I hadn't even stayed, I had simply acted, and that made all the difference. I did not answer Daniel's calls that night or the next morning or the day after, not out of spite, not to punish him with silence. But because I had already said everything that mattered in the only language he had ever taken seriously action. Words in our marriage had been easy to dismiss, to soften, to reframe until they no longer required change. Paperwork, however, does not negotiate, and once filed, it moves forward whether you are ready or not. I checked into a modest extended stay hotel in Tysons, the kind that offered weekly rates, a small kitchenette, and just enough distance to think clearly. I unpacked what I needed, set my laptop on the desk, and opened the folder I had been building for weeks. Bank statements, insurance policies, tax returns, a quiet record of a life I had managed carefully while everyone else assumed it simply existed. It is a strange thing to realize how invisible your contributions have been until you stop making them. The lights still turn on, the bills still get paid for a while, and then gradually the system begins to reveal its dependencies. I had not hidden anything, not truly. I had simply organized it, separated what was mine, closed what was shared, and ensured that when I stepped away, I would not take more than my portion. But I would not leave behind what I had built either. On Monday morning, I went to work as usual. The office in Fairfax was quiet, familiar, a place where my identity was defined by competence rather than relationships. My colleague Karen noticed the change immediately. She always did, but she did not press. Only placed a cup of coffee on my desk and said, "You look like you've made a decision," in that gentle, knowing way of hers. "I have," I replied. "Then whatever comes next," she said, "you'll handle it." I nodded because that at least was something I could control. Daniel's messages grew more frequent as the day went on. First confusion, then concern, then a sharper edge of urgency. He asked where I was, why I hadn't said anything, what this was all about, and finally if we could talk. I read each one carefully, not rushing, not reacting, and then at the end of the day I replied with a single line. "We can speak through our attorneys for now." It was not cruel. It was not dramatic, it was simply the right thing to do. By the time I returned to the hotel that evening, my phone had finally gone quiet. Back at his parents' house, however, the silence felt different. Daniel spent the morning reviewing the documents again, this time much more carefully. He traced every line and every clause as if reading them one more time might reveal a mistake. There wasn't one. The filing was clean, thorough, and unmistakably intentional. He had already spoken with 2 attorneys, one recommended by a friend and another he found after a quick search. Both told him essentially the same thing. "She's prepared." The first attorney paused before adding, "You need to be prepared too." The word stayed with him. "What do you mean, prepared?" his mother asked after he repeated the conversation. Her voice carried a mix of disbelief and irritation. "She's a receptionist at an insurance office. What could she possibly prepare?" "She's not a receptionist," Daniel corrected automatically. Then he realized he had never truly explained what I did for a living. It had always been easier to let his parents assume my job was something simpler. "She manages corporate accounts," he said. "Policies worth millions." His mother waved her hand dismissively. "That's still just paperwork." This time Daniel didn't argue, he simply looked back down at the folder. The second attorney had been even more direct. "You had a joint checking account." "We did," Daniel answered. "She closed it." "Of course she did." "And the joint savings, separate now, credit cards, there was only one shared card." "She paid it off last week." A brief silence followed before the attorney spoke again. "Here's the reality. She's limited her exposure, secured her finances, and filed first. That doesn't mean you're in trouble, but it does mean you're behind." Behind. Daniel sat at the same kitchen table where we had shared countless ordinary moments and tried to make sense of everything. The life he thought he understood didn't match the one documented in front of him. "She moved her direct deposit," he told his mother, who had begun pacing the room. "When's last pay period? How could she do that without you knowing?" Daniel looked at her quietly. "Because it was never my account," he admitted. "It was hers. I was just using it." The words hit harder than he expected. Megan, who had stayed longer than planned for Ethan's sake, watched silently. She had always been practical, steady in a way Daniel once appreciated but later took for granted. Now that same steadiness returned. You should listen to your lawyer, she said. And maybe try to understand why she did this before deciding how to respond. His mother turned sharply. So now you're taking her side? I'm not taking sides, Megan replied calmly. I'm saying people don't usually file for divorce like this unless they've been thinking about it for a long time. Daniel rubbed a hand across his face. She never said anything. Megan looked at him for a moment. Are you sure? The question lingered. As Daniel thought back not just to Thanksgiving but to the weeks before it, he started remembering things he had ignored. Questions about bills, requests to review their finances. Moments when I stood in the doorway waiting for him to ask what was wrong, he never did. She tried, he admitted quietly. His mother shook her head. Even if she did, this is still an overreaction. You invite your ex-wife over one time and she files for divorce. It wasn't one time, Daniel said more firmly. It was a pattern. The word felt unfamiliar, but it was true. Megan gave a small nod. So what are you going to do? Daniel looked down at the final page, at my signature resting neatly beneath the last paragraph. For the first time, he understood this wasn't something he could explain away. I'm going to respond, he said, properly. And her, his mother asked. You're just going to let her leave like this? Daniel hesitated. The truth was, I hadn't simply walked away. I had stepped out of a system I had been holding together for years. Without me, that system was beginning to shift in ways none of them expected. She's already gone, he said quietly. For the first time, the weight of those words settled over the room, not anger. Not panic, something else, understanding. The first week after I left was surprisingly uneventful, and somehow that unsettled Daniel more than any argument could have. He had expected shouting, confrontation, something emotional he could react to. Instead, he was met with silence and a slow unraveling that revealed itself one piece at a time. It started with the internet. His father noticed first, tapping the router and blaming the provider. When Daniel checked the account, he discovered the service hadn't been canceled. It had simply been transferred. The old shared account was closed. A new one had been opened under my name and my new address. That's ridiculous, his mother snapped. Call them. Tell them it's a mistake. It's not a mistake, Daniel replied. The utilities followed the same pattern. Nothing was shut off. Everything had simply been reorganized. Each account quietly revealed the same truth. I had been the one managing all of it, not just paying the bills, keeping everything running, making sure nothing was forgotten. Without me, nothing collapsed overnight. It simply paused, waiting for someone else to take responsibility. Why didn't you handle any of this? His mother asked. Daniel had no answer. Because the honest one was simple, he had never needed to. At the same time, his business began showing cracks he could no longer ignore. An investor pulled back, citing uncertainty. A friend who had promised support became harder to reach. It wasn't sabotage, it was reality catching up. Meanwhile, I continued my routine, work meetings, emails. Quiet evenings in a place that was finally my own. I met with my attorney twice that week, reviewing paperwork and discussing the next steps. Nothing rushed, nothing emotional. Just thoughtful decisions based on facts. I wasn't trying to take everything. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was simply drawing a line. Daniel finally reached me on the 8th day. Not with another phone call, I had stopped answering those. Instead, he sent a short message. Can we meet, just to talk, no arguments? I read it twice, then once more. This time the urgency was gone. There was something quieter in his words, something that suggested he finally understood this wasn't something he could force his way through. I replied, 1 hour, public place. We met at a cafe in Vienna, halfway between his parents' house and my office. Neutral ground, quiet enough to talk, public enough to keep everything respectful. Daniel arrived early. His coffee sat untouched between his hands. He looked different, not broken, not defeated, just aware. Thank you for coming, he said. I said I would. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, it was careful, measured, like two people learning to communicate in a language they should have understood years ago. I got the papers, he said. I know, I've been going through everything, the accounts, the bills, the way everything was organized. I nodded, that was the point. He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. You handled a lot more than I ever realized. Yes, there was no anger in my voice, only truth. I should have paid attention. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence do what words couldn't. It's not just about the money, he said. I know. It isn't, I agreed. He leaned back, studying me carefully. Then why didn't you tell me? Before all of this, I met his eyes. I did. You just didn't hear me. The words were gentle, but they landed. Daniel looked down, his fingers resting against the edge of his coffee cup. I thought we were okay, he admitted quietly. I thought we were partners, I replied. Another silence settled between us. Thanksgiving, he began, then stopped as if unsure how to continue. That wasn't the beginning, I said. It was just the moment it became clear. Clear, what he asked, that I wasn't being included in decisions that affected my life. I said that your definition of family didn't fully include me. That's not true, he said quickly. I didn't argue, I just held his gaze, and after a moment he looked away. I didn't mean for it to come across that way, he said, quieter now. I know, I replied. That doesn't change how it felt. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. What do you want now? He asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. I want clarity, I said. I want a life where I'm not an afterthought. And as he pressed, I paused, because this was the part that mattered. Not the paperwork, not the logistics, but the decision that came after understanding. I don't think we can go back to what we had, I said. He closed his eyes briefly, as if he had expected that answer but still needed to hear it. Can we build something new? He asked. The question hung there, fragile, uncertain. I considered it, not emotionally, but honestly. Maybe, I said finally, but not right now. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting more than agreeing. I'm sorry, he said then, and this time it was different. Not defensive, not rushed, not framed as a way to move past the moment, but simply offered. I believed him. That didn't mean I would stay. I know, I said. We sat there for a few more minutes, not speaking, not needing to. Snorts, the conversation had shifted something, not enough to undo what had happened, but enough to make the next steps clearer. When I stood to leave, Daniel didn't try to stop me. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. And as I walked out of the cafe back into the quiet rhythm of a life I was rebuilding on my own terms, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. Revenge wasn't what I had done. I had simply stopped accepting less than I deserved. The divorce did not happen all at once. It moved the way most real things do in America, through paperwork, scheduled calls, measured disclosures, and a sequence of small decisions that add up to a life-changing course. Weeks became months, and in that time something steadier replaced the shock that had once colored everything. Not relief, not regret, something quieter, clarity. We agreed early on to keep things civil, not for appearances, not for convenience, but because there was a child at the center of all this, and children remember more than adults think. Ethan did not need to witness bitterness to understand that adults make choices. He needed to see that those choices could be handled with restraint, with dignity, even when they hurt. Daniel and I met only when necessary, often in offices that smelled faintly of paper and coffee, where conversation stayed within the lines of agreements and terms. And yet occasionally there were moments, brief, unguarded, when the structure slipped and something more human came through. I didn't realize how much you were carrying, he said once, not looking at me, his attention fixed on the document in front of him. I didn't realize how little you noticed, I replied, not harshly, just honestly. He nodded, accepting it in a way he hadn't before. His parents, on the other hand, took longer to adjust. At first there had been resistance, quiet criticism, a few attempts to reframe the narrative into something that made them more comfortable. I had expected that. What I had not expected was the gradual shift that followed, subtle but real. It started with something small, a message from his mother, not an apology, not at first. Just a question about an insurance form she didn't understand sent to my email instead of Daniel's. I stared at it for a moment, recognizing the significance, not in the content, but in the act itself. She was reaching out not because she had to, but because she had come to recognize, however reluctantly, that I knew things she did not. I replied briefly, professionally, explaining what she needed to do. There was no immediate response. Then, hours later, a single line, "Thank you." It was not reconciliation, but it was something. Megan, in her own way, had already found her place again. Not as a replacement, not as a shadow of what had been, but as what she had always been, Ethan's mother. Our interactions remained polite, respectful, grounded in the shared understanding that none of us needed to compete for a role that had already been defined. One afternoon, as we stood outside Ethan's school after a pickup, she turned to me and said, "I didn't want things to go this far." "I know," I replied. "I just wanted him to have a normal holiday," she added. "So did I." She looked at me, then really looked and nodded slowly as if something had finally aligned. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," and that was enough. The legal process concluded without drama. Assets were divided fairly. Accounts were closed or reassigned, and the final papers were signed in a quiet office on a Tuesday morning that felt no different from any other. There was no moment of triumph, no sense of victory, just a steady acknowledgement that something had ended and something else had already begun. Daniel and I spoke once more after everything was finalized, not to revisit the past, not to renegotiate what had already been decided, just to close the loop. "I think I understand now," he said, standing across from me in the parking lot outside the courthouse. "Not everything, but enough. That's more than before," I said. He gave a small, rueful smile. "Yeah, it is." There was a pause, then he added, "I hope you find what you're looking for." I considered that for a moment. "I already have," I said. He nodded, accepting that, and for the first time since we had met, there was no attempt to change the outcome, no effort to hold on to something that no longer existed. We parted there. No anger, no promises, just understanding. Life as it does moved forward. I found a small townhouse closer to my office, nothing extravagant but entirely mine. I chose the furniture arranged. The rooms created a space that reflected who I was not, who I had tried to be for someone else. My work continued steady and rewarding, and for the first time in a long while, my time felt like my own. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I would think back to that Thanksgiving night, not with bitterness, but with a kind of distant clarity. It had not been the worst moment of my life, nor the most painful. It had simply been the moment everything became undeniable. Revenge, I realized, had never been about making them suffer. Its snorts had been about refusing to stay where I was not valued. It had been about drawing a line calmly, deliberately, and stepping across it without looking back. And in the end, that was enough because respect, real respect, does not come from history or obligation or proximity. It comes from recognition, and if someone cannot see your worth, you do not argue. You do not beg, you simply walk away. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever found yourself in a place where you felt unseen, unheard, or quietly pushed aside, take a moment to reflect on your own boundaries, your own worth, and the choices you have the power to make. Share this story with someone who might need it, and if you'd like to hear more stories like this, grounded, real, and meaningful, consider subscribing.